Have Celtic done enough in this transfer window to give themselves a chance now? Because the stakes are high.
I think they were powder puff throughout the entirety of last season. They're relying on a out of sorts Dyson Maeda for much of the campaign before he exploded into life in the final weeks. And geez, what a run of form he had! 9 goals in his last 7 games. But I think before that they were relying on a unfit Kelechi and Acho, Johnny Kenny at times. And they were just a bit of a mismatch up front. They've obviously spent a lot of money. They've shattered their transfer record with Casper who has already become a massive fan's favourite. He's made such a difference. I think he's lifted the entire club, never mind the team. You see his link-up play with Benjamin Nygren. I don't think it's any coincidence that Nygren is now playing his best football of his Celtic career so far. He's been outstanding. A lot of criticism towards Nygren was, can he to flip the old add goals to his game cliche. A lot of people were saying, can he add games to his goals? Because he used to, for much of last season, he filtered in and out of the game. But I think, look at his stats so far this season. 6 goal contributions in 3 games, which is outstanding. Again, I think having a recognised striker like Casper Hu up front has made that difference, because you can see that there's neat link-up play there. Then you've Camilo Duran, who's naturally a striker, a centre forward, but he's adaptable to playing out wide. And again, after a kind of fairly flat competitive debut against Dundee, he's really came alive against Kilmarnock, and obviously he opened his goal account at Dundee United at the weekend. So I think those two in particular have hit the ground running. The big question is over Mika Bauer, whether he starts tomorrow night in midfield. For me, I think he's got to. He spent £6.8 million in a midfielder. He's had a decent pre-season under his belt. He's played friendlies. He obviously made his debut off the bench at Tannadice at the weekend as well. I think with Celtic having so many limited options now in the midfield in the centre park, then he's got to come in. The other option is between probably him, Luke McCowan or Rio Hatate. Luke McCowan, he's been a bit of a squad player since he's arrived at the club a couple of seasons ago. He made his mark in Europe, to be fair, last year. He scored the winning goal in Germany against Stuttgart, albeit Celtic crashed out of Europa League. But that goal was the first win that Celtic had secured, the first win Celtic ever had in German soil. So he's proven that he can make an impact. And then there's Rio Hatate, who, for his first two years at Celtic, he was probably the best midfielder in Scotland, but he's just completely fallen away.
What do you expect is the next kind of moves for Hatate going forward?
Yeah. Obviously we've reported that there's been clubs interested in him in MLS and other leagues in Europe, but he's rejected them, and he really fancies himself for a top 5 league. So that's clearly what he's holding out for, based on his level of performance, his consistency levels over the last 2 seasons. I doubt if he's going to land that. If he does, it'll be maybe to a League One team fighting at the bottom end of the table. But clearly he's getting visions to follow in the path of Kyogo and Dyson Maeda and try and play at the highest level possible. But it just looks as if he's lost his groove at Celtic, he's lost his motivation, and to me, I don't really think you can rely on Rio Hatate to start tomorrow night, possibly making him back from the bench. But I think it'll be, I think Mika Bauer's the man that's going to get an order alongside Callum McGregor and Benjamin Nygren.
Yeah, of course, and Celtic putting in a thumping performance at the weekend, the League Cup. Dundee United facing the woodwork many times in that
5
match.
Times.
Yeah, of course. And looking at that, we saw the debut of Bauer and Hassan. Bauer looks okay, but Hassan looked a wee bit off the mark coming straight in. We're talking about how who's kind of lifted the Celtic support. And obviously the board are getting a bit less stick as a result of that. But do you think the timing of that is an issue? Is that them kind of falling into their own demons, as well as just not having enough at the right time, not giving them the time to settle into this Celtic squad?
Yeah, I think clearly in an ideal world, Celtic and any manager in football would want the majority of their signings in the door for the start of pre-season. Unfortunately, that's not worked out for Celtic. Obviously, they've changed their transfer strategy this summer. In the past, we've seen guys like, last summer, we've seen guys like Shin Yamada and Hayato Inamura, who, by the way, didn't even make the Champions League squad this time last year for the playoff. just players that Brendan Rodgers didn't rate, but they were brought in as project signings and already they're out the door. Jemai Simpson-Busey is another one. So I think they've swerved away from that strategy and they're clearly focusing on quality over quantity. And judging by the signings and the level of money that they've invested, clearly, the signings on paper that they brought in, we've seen Duran, we've seen who, they've clearly made an impact so far. But on paper, we can't really judge Bauer or Hassan, but on paper, those guys look the real deal as well. So these deals take time to negotiate, as we saw with Bauer. It took 3 weeks to get that one over the line. And yeah, it's clearly unfortunate that Celtic haven't managed to do more business before tonight's deadline, especially losing Arnie Engels so close to it. And yeah, I think that's probably the real kind of fear for Celtic fans, is the fact that they haven't replaced such an influential and key player like Engels in the middle of the park, because they don't have anybody like that. They don't have anybody with the physique and the profile and the running power that Engels has. They're all very much like for like. I've seen Mika Bauer compared to as or labelled the German Hatate. A dynamic player, decent passing range. I think he's capable of a couple of goals as well. But you don't really have that powerhouse in midfield, that real physical specimen. And I think that's what Celtic could lack or will lack at the European level unless they get a replacement. And look, it's not going to happen. So you need to draw a line under it, and Martin O'Neill will just go. He needs to deal with the card that he's been dealt. And Celtic should still have enough quality in the building to get this job done, because, as I said, there cannot be a repeat of last season's disaster against Barry Almaty. That really was an open goal, and they failed to prepare for that. They didn't get enough quality signings in the door for that. This time, at least they have a prolific striker in Casper, who, even a prolific versatile attacker in Camilo Duran, who, by the way, combined, the pair of them scored 11 goals in the Champions League proper last season. So that's the type of calibre of signings that Celtic fans have been craving, and you've just got to fans will be pinning their hopes now on those two making an impact.
Massive upgrade on an Asian Kelechi Iheanacho, don't you think? I think when you look at this Celtic squad, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done with that. Win, lose or draw tomorrow. What can we see going forward? What additions? Is there anything in the movement?
Yeah, they're obviously looking to bolster various areas of the park. I think they're definitely in the market for another goalkeeper, a left back as well. You're looking probably. I think you're looking probably at 2 central midfielders at least coming in. I think that's a necessity. You've lost Paulo Bernardo as well, people forget. So you've lost a wee bit of kind of strength and depth in the middle of the park. And you look at the run of fixtures that are on the horizon in September. Angus, I think the Celtic can end up cramming in over the course of the next month before the international break. I think across all 4 competitions, they could potentially have 9 games. So they're going to be playing, every midweek up until the international break. So they need a squad capable of competing, and Martin O'Neill needs to be able to, hang his hat on different and rotating his players and, giving fringe players a chance in coming in. So Celtic clearly need strength and depth if they're going to compete against all 4 fronts this season. And that's why I think, you're looking probably at least another four players coming in. And, there could be a couple of outgoings as well. We've just spoken about Rio Hatate. His future looks destined to be elsewhere. Johnny Kenny, I know that the manager's had a chat with Johnny Kenny, but he's not featured in any of the matchday squads so far. And you might see some movement in that front towards the end of the window, maybe even on loan. I know that Bolton Wanderers are keen to have him back. So there could be a couple of outgoings as well. But Celtic have just got to hope they get through this qualifier, they bag the £40 million, and they can reinvest it on more quality additions to really tool up for the Champions League proper, the league phase. But the thing is, there's been a joyful mood around Celtic Park, around this neck of the woods over the last few weeks because of the quality and calibre and pedigree of signings that have come in. But we all know, Angus, that mood can quickly change. We saw it last season how toxic it went. There was a dark cloud that hung over Celtic Park for vast majority of the season. And I think it's crucial. I think Michael Nicholson, the board, and Martin O'Neill will have their fingers crossed that doesn't happen again this season. But as I say, I think Celtic are still despite not getting that midfielder in, I think they've still got enough quality in the building to progress past LASK, who, by the way, are no mugs. You know, they're the best team in Austria. They've obviously they beat the likes of RB Salzburg, who have got plenty of money behind them, to the title. Sturm as well, who battered Hearts 6-0 over 2 legs in aggregate. So they're no mugs, and they're going to be a tricky opponent for Celtic, especially over in Austria next week. It's unfortunate that Celtic, you know, as a seeded team, they're not really handing the luck of the draw, because they are going to be obviously playing the first leg at home and the decisive second leg away from home. So that's counting against them. But it just proves there's even more of an onus on Celtic to get a result tomorrow night. And I think, you know, if they can get a 2-goal lead, that would put them in a real strong position. But I think Martinelli would settle just for getting a win. And we'll see how they approach next week, which myself and Nick Cannon will be there in Austria to bring you the latest from.
Of course, mate. And before I let you go, I know you've got another press conference to run away to, but can Celtic do it tomorrow night, all things considered?
Yeah, as I say, I fancy them. I was asked for my predictions on Rickers Sport, being tomorrow's paper, and it's online. And I went for 3-1 Celtic. I feel, as I say, they've got goal scorers up front now. They've got difference makers. They've got game changers, which they severely lacked last season. My only issue is, as I say, in the middle of the park, I worry about the strength that they've got in there. Also, watching Celtic this season, I know they've been Cameron Carter-Vickers and Austin Trusty have been pretty solid defensively, but you mentioned how many times Dundee United rattled the woodwork at Tannadice, 5 times, which is, I think, it's just one short of equaling a world record, which was Germany against Kazakhstan in a World Cup qualifier in 2013. So that shows you that Celtic are leaking far too many chances, and to me, I think they need to be a lot more resolute from from defence to the middle of the park. I think there's a bit of a breakdown there at the minute. As I say, they're leaking too many chances, and that would be a concern. Even at Kilmarnock, you know, Celtic battered Kilmarnock 5-1 at Rugby Park the other weekend, and at 1-0, Kilmarnock could have easily scored an equaliser, or scored a couple of goals before Celtic eventually put the game to bed. And Casper Hill, obviously, who went on to that with a hat-trick, and Celtic ran out convincing winners. But, you know, I think against a higher calibre opposition like LASK, they can't afford to give up so many chances, otherwise they will be punished. So that's why I do think they will concede tomorrow night, but I fancy them to get the job done and put themselves in a commanding position going over to Linz next week.